I apologize first if my voice sounds weird.
Okay. So what is okay, Miss?
Have you all had good today?
Yes.
Yes. So, does anyone know what you learned in the previous class?
Previous we talk about conservation.
Conservation, yes.
Conservation.
You learn about conservation and the threats against biodiversity. Okay? And in the previous class, I asked you about the Raja Ampat case, about how the nickel mining threatens against the animals native in Raja Ampat. Can anyone mention one animal that is only found in Raja Ampat? Nawasi?
Nawasi.
Those animal native in Raja Ampat can be found in other island? What and in other island in Indonesia, like for example, Sumatran tiger, you can only find that in Sumatra, right?
Yes.
Java tiger, you can only find it in Java Island. The same can be applied in Sumatran elephant. So from that question, today I will be teaching you about the biodiversity, specifically about the wildlife and wildlife in Indonesia. So before we start our lesson, does anyone want to volunteer to lead the prayer?
Before we start to the lesson, we should pray first. Pray with it.
Now, before we start our lesson, I want to establish some of the rules. The rules are easy. So first one is pay attention, and the second one, no one's acting or opposite to use it. If you decide to disobey, I will put it. And number 3 is discipline. And the last one is don't know something, I want me to look at something, please raise your hand and ask. It's a simple rules, right? We all want to do it?
Yes.
So as I mentioned earlier, that I will be teaching about the wildlife and wildlife, the biographical boundaries in Indonesia. So from this class, we will be learning about the identifying animals in wildlife and wildlife, and the difference between wildlife and wildlife animals. Okay?
In between two of the islands of Indonesia, there's an ancient line that is both real and not real. You can't see it, but it's there all the same. If you stood on the coast of Bali and looked east to the shores of Lombok, you'd be staring right at the line's narrowest point, a 32-kilometer stretch of water that seems pretty unassuming. This invisible barrier weaves its way through the entire Malay archipelago, the largest collection of islands on the planet. See, on the western side, the animal life is characteristic of Asia, featuring rhinos, elephants, tigers, and woodpeckers, to name a few. But cross the line, and things suddenly change. You won't find those same species on the eastern side. Instead, the islands have a totally different cast of ecological characters, including marsupials, Komodo dragons, cockatoos, and honey-eaters. This is what scientists call a biogeographic boundary, the meeting point of two regions of biodiversity that are highly distinct. And this particular line, called the Wallace Line, is perhaps the sharpest and most iconic of all. So how did this invisible line come to be? Why does it shape the distribution of so many species? How did we figure out the path it takes? And how could it be both real and imaginary? The Wallace Line was first sketched out in 1859 by a guy named, wait for it, Wallace. Alfred Russel Wallace, to be exact. a British naturalist who you might have also heard of as the co-discoverer of natural selection. That concept came to Wallace in a literal fever dream as he lay bedridden with malaria during part of his 8-year trip around the Malay archipelago. And while it ended up being overshadowed by Darwin on that front, the second best idea he had on that trip was the existence of the Wallace line. I mean, two good ideas in one trip. This idea helped to forever establish him as the father of biogeography, the study of the distribution of living things. He had spent his voyage observing and collecting as many species as he could, hopping from island to island across almost the entire archipelago. And it was as he moved east from Bali to Lombok that he first noticed something intriguing. Even though the islands were separated only by a narrow strait, the change in animal life wasn't gradual and subtle. It was sudden and distinct. Wallace saw the differences in animal life between the two as being even more striking than between England and Japan. It was birds that initially caught his attention. Certain species that were plentiful on Java and Bali, like the yellow-headed beaver, coppersmith barbet, and the Javanese three-toed woodpecker, didn't exist at all on Lombok. And this abrupt shift extended to mammals and even many insects too. Almost as if an invisible barrier was separating two different worlds. But why and how? The biogeographic line that he drew, which others would tweak in later years, didn't just reflect proximity to islands. In fact, some islands on opposing sides of the line are closer to each other than many islands on the same sides are to one another. So Wallace realized that other more mysterious forces must be in play, like, say, geology. He recognized that the geological past shapes the biological present. And because the distribution of living species today partly reflects ancient geological events, he saw biogeography as a way to uncover epic chapters of the planet's history that might otherwise have been unknowable. These concepts are easy to take for granted today. We talk about them all the time here on Eons. But they were still fairly new ideas in Wallace's day. And when taking this perspective, he concluded that the Western Islands must have once all been connected to each other and to the Asian mainland. While today they're surrounded by shallow seas, this is only the result of a geologically recent rise in sea levels. How else could the big animals of that side, like tigers and rhinos and tapirs, have ended up on the islands? Because they're now separated by expanses of water that are way too wide for those species to cross. He had a similar thought about how the islands east of Java and Borneo had formed. At least some of them were the remnants of a former Australian continent. Wallace had a hunch that, throughout all of that change, deeper waters with strong currents between the two regions must have prevented many species from crossing from continent to continent when sea levels were lower. And this is still preventing many species from crossing today when sea levels are higher and the continents are fragmented into neighboring groups of islands. Even many flying bird and insect species obey the line, ones that aren't capable of crossing those stretches of open ocean. Wallace had pulled together many pieces of the puzzle, but he and other scientists at the time were missing one key idea to complete the picture: plate tectonics. The surface of the planet is not static, of course, it's dynamic. It's made up of individual large sections or plates that move and collide over vast stretches of geologic time. It's yet another concept that's easy for us to take for granted, but which is actually a relatively recent addition to our understanding of the world. In fact, plate tectonics only became widely accepted in the late 1960s, more than half a century after Wallace's death, and also around the time when I was born, which means I'm as old as plate tectonics. We now know that plate tectonics shapes our planet in many ways, including forming and deforming continents, raising up island chains, and building mountain ranges. And studies have shown the Malay archipelago to be one of the most complex tectonic regions in the world, a meeting point of multiple plates all jostling for space. And this is responsible for not only the area's many volcanoes and frequent seismic activity, but also the peculiar contrasts of its animal life. Because by the 1980s, scientists were able to say with confidence that the Wallace Line is, at its core, a result of plate tectonics. Wallace had correctly identified that two former continuous landmasses had existed on either side of this line in the deep past. Today we know them as the paleocontinents of Sunda in the west and Sahul in the east, both of which existed during the ice ages when more water was locked up in ice and sea levels were lower. Wallace didn't know it, but while they're pretty close now, the two partly sunken continents used to be much, much further apart. The Sahul continent of the eastern side of the line encompassed Australia, Tasmania, New Guinea, and the Aru Islands, and it only approached the Asian Sunda continental shelf in the west around 20 to 25 million years ago in the late Oligocene or early Miocene epoch. This was a result of the Australian plate slowly drifting north over tens of millions of years after breaking away from Antarctica in the south, bringing its distinctive community of birds, reptiles, and marsupials with it. So even though the species of each side are neighbors now, they've been evolving separately for eons, their two worlds only colliding fairly recently in evolutionary terms. And in between them, immediately east of the line, a complex force of plate tectonics created a chain of new islands in an area of the archipelago that's now called Wallacea. These oceanic islands differ from the continental islands that flank them in that they were never connected to either of the greater landmasses. They were ecological blank slates, waiting to be filled in with whatever creatures could make it there. And those ended up being mostly species from the Australian side, seeing as the Wallace Line acted as a barrier to Asian species moving east. Take, for instance, the Komodo dragon, a giant monitor lizard that today lives on a handful of islands in eastern Indonesia. Their fossils first appear in mainland Australia more than 3 million years ago in the Pliocene epoch, only reaching their current Indonesian island home in the Wallacea region around 1 million years ago. And even now, the deep waters with strong currents that weave between the two regions, including the strait between Lombok and Bali, still limit the dispersal of many species across the line, keeping the differences in their evolutionary history so strikingly visible. This is what created the stark contrast bisecting the jungle of islands that Wallace first sketched out in 1859, and that still fascinates biogeographers today. Wallace's invisible line may not be real in a physical sense, but it shows just how loudly ancient geological events can echo through time, and how they shape the diversity and distribution of life in strange and contrasting ways. And while Darwin might get virtually all the credit as the guy who figured out how species came to be, Wallace is still recognized as a pioneer in figuring out how species came to be where they are. So the plate tectonics also explains why Earth has supercontinents. You can celebrate this fact with our saga of the supercontinents.
There's a video earlier, there are so many things to learn, like, so, does anyone want to answer what is dual line? Oh, and you guys saw the video, right? What are the videos? So the wireless line is one of the biogeographical boundaries of fauna and flora in Indonesia. So the region included in the wireless line is the Java Island and the Kalimantan Island and the wireless line separate the Asiatic fauna from the transition fauna in the middle of the wireless and web line, which is this transition fauna, or it's called the Wallacea line. And the Weber lines, the video only we don't mention it. And the Weber line separate the Australian fauna from the transition fauna. So the Weber line included the Papua, the Lombok, and and the video mentioned earlier, why does this line is created? So million years ago, the tectonic plate changed, and as a result, this line was created, separating the island and separating the animals. So in the wireless line, the animals in the wireless line, you cannot find it in the wireless line. And vice versa, the wireless line animals, you cannot find it in the wireless line. There are two different animals. And also, what is the reason the animals in the wireless line cannot move to the wireless line? Does anyone want been separated by the ocean? Yeah, separated by the ocean. The ocean is too deep for them to cross the line. And another reason is because the climate between the wireless line and the wireless line is different. As I explained in our last class, every animal have different habitats and they need different climate. to type, right? So so this I'm showing you difference between animals from the west side and the west side. So from the west animals, which side are they came from? Whereas yes, but there's the Sumatera Tiger, there's the Sultan. You can only find that in Sumatra, and those are these animals which they came from the side, and they're also different, right? Very different. And they are called the Australian animals. Can anyone answer what animals are they? Kakak, suami, khusus. Yeah.
What is that, miss?
Which animal are you finding?
The left one, and the left one, and the right one, the right one.
Okay, very well.
Oh, panda. Is that panda?
Enggak, ekip naik. Masuk
What is that?
Oh, it's like kita, there's casualty, the blue one. The animal that have the blue
Oh,
and the
I think it's frog.
not the white one. Yes.
That was it. Okay, okay. I already understand.
If you don't understand. Hey.
Okay, sorry.
So this is only the small example of the whereas and where we like animals. So I like to give you a group discussion. First group, the first line, and first group. The second one is the bear. You will find the question. So I want to give you one here. Before I ended the group discussion, kita present until we're done presenting your answer. How many times do you? Just 3 minutes enough?
Enough is
You can search, okay. You can search, you can use your phone. Yeah, yeah, go to.
Wait, sorry, I have trouble with connection.
Oh, it's okay, you can just.
Share discuss.
Yes, I'm different.
Okay.
seconds left. Anyone wait for the answer yet?
Finish.
Is everyone finished?
Yes.
Good deal. Now, I want almost to present the answer. So first we'll do.
Harimau.
Oke, ya kita akan menyebutkan hewan-hewan yang ditemukan di garis polos line. Apa aja?
Harimau Sumatera. Orangutan.
Orangutan.
Gajah.
Gajah. Ya, gitu.
Oh tadi ini kerbau.
Wow. Gitu.
Terus
Terus
yang kedua perbedaannya.
the different about the animals in wallace line compared to other line. Bedanya.
Saya want to.
Kalau di Wallace Line itu dia lokasinya di Bali sampai Lombok dan Borneo sampai Sulawesi. Dan animal yang tersedianya itu ada gajah juga, ada harimau dan ada orangutan. Dan the Western Island were once connected to mainland Asia. Kalau Weber Line itu dia lokasinya dari Wallace Line sampai Papua. Terus habis itu animalnya itu ada burung cendrawasih, terus ada kanguru sama kuskus. Terus their islands-nya are geology closer to Australia. Next.
Good result.
Yay!
Thank you. So the next one is good.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
We're from the group news. So the example of the animals in the line is anoa, kanguru,
Babi rusa, tarsius,
Terus kerang hitam, kuskus,
Papua.
megapoda, kelelawar, pemakan buah, kalong.
lalu yang membedakan antara animals in Weberland the wildlife line, the camels is more unique sometimes.
Badannya kecil, small lagi.
Yeah.
Ya, habis itu dia juga terletak di sisi timur Indonesia, di Papua, Maluku, gitu.
Good job, good job. Good job. So from the animals that you almost mentioned, as I explained earlier, the Wallace Line, the animals are more Asiatic, like tigers, elephants, orangutan, and the Weber Line, they are more Australians. They are kangaroos, cendrawasih, Aswani, and the Indian one tend to be more colorful, tend to be more unique. It seems like you all have grasped the concept of understanding these topics. So you guys know what comes next, right? Yes, quiz, quiz.
No.
No, we're not there.
Another quiz.
Oh.
The question I leave you. Hmm, 2 minutes and a half is enough, right? done? That was nice. How many left?
Ten.
Impressive. How about this one? Are you done yet?
I get 15.
15.
Okay.
Wait. Does anyone get 20? So? No? Is the question too hard?
No,
Just forget.
forget.
Or you just forward. You just forward. Which question is the hardest? Is it the first one? About which region included in the website?
Yes, because we forget, miss.
Forget.
Sorry, my mistake.
That's my
First say the whole question.
The more question is hard. Oh my.
Entire.
Okay. So the hardest is the region included, right? And the last two questions is easy, right?
Easy.
Ooh, yeah, I get it. Remembering the region included in the website, reading the maps are pretty hard. But it's fine. You guys are still learning. I don't expect you all to be a genius.
Yes.
Thank you.
We are.
So we are reaching the end of our class. Now, before I end it, does anyone want to conclude every material we've learned so far?
Yes. So today we also learned about the wellness line and river line, and we learned about the cross restricted animals live there and why they cannot even cruise the lines like that. Miss?
Yes. Anyone want to add?
Same with
With
Lisa.
this. Did you guys say that because you guys follow? Okay, it's fine. So, if we get end of our class, I'm going to say that this is our last class.
No.
The next one will be a final class.
Oh, so sad.
I don't like it.
Make sure you guys learn. Okay, so anyone wants to do the prayer?
Me.
Okay.
Okay, we have Minister Listen. Before we go home, it will be good if we pray with you. Pray.
Okay. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, miss.
Thank you, miss.
Our class ended here.
Yay!